Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode on the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, including the peer-reviewed cancer research program. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Donna Kimbark. Dr. Kimbark is the program manager for the PRCRP. And we are delighted to have her here to talk a little bit more about the program and hopefully answer some questions from our research community about this particular program and their potential applications to it. This is also an opportunity. We will have some questions from the community about this particular program, as our patients, families, and caregivers are awfully invested and have an elevated level of scientific understanding. So with that, Dr. Kimbark.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's great to be here and talk to the community and get that research brewing for the mesothelioma patients and their caregivers. So let's go to the next slide. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, and that is where the Peer Review Cancer Research Program actually sits. The CDMRP's vision is to transform healthcare through innovative and impactful research. How do we do this? We do this by responsibly managing collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for service members, veterans, and the American public. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this really sums up a lot about CDMRP, so I'm not going to spend a lot of the time that we have today on CDMRP because it's all really summed up very nicely on this slide. As I said, it's really about funding innovative and impactful research. And why do we do this? We're doing this to try to accelerate research to advance cures and improvements overall for those that may have some conditions or issues with their long-term care. And we want to have breakthroughs that will really accelerate the solutions for cancers like mesothelioma. We conduct research and we fund research, I should say, we fund research across the entire world. We are a global funding institution. We started in 1992 with an appropriation to the DOD. For women's health, and then that expanded to a breast cancer research program, and that's when CDMRP was founded. Breast cancer advocates went to the Hill asking for a different way to fund research, and the appropriation was added to the Department of Defense's appropriation, and we ended up with the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. How we fund this research, how we decide what is going to be funded, is really based on our two-tiered review process that includes scientists, clinicians like yourself, and consumers, patient advocates. Let's go to the next slide. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the really highlighted area, and that's the Peer Review Cancer Research Program. PRCRP started in fiscal year 2009 with an appropriation of $16 million. The congressional language each and every year tells us the topic areas. These could be specific cancers or buckets of cancers or other research areas that will be funded. From fiscal year 09 through 22, there's been around $780 million and over 900 awards made. For fiscal year 23, we have $130 million, and that's all to be determined. So it's really time for you to actually start those engines running and apply for this $130 million appropriation. How we see it as the Peer Review Cancer Research Program is really, our vision is to advance mission readiness for those in the U.S. military affected by cancer. And our mission, how we do this, is really to promote high-impact cancer research in prevention, detection, treatment, quality of life, and survivorship for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. I've given you a little bit of information here. There's the PRCRP webpage. Like you would if you were going to interview for a new job, go ahead and look at that webpage because it gives you information that you might not find anywhere else. It gives you highlights, research highlights of the research that we've funded before. We have our program book there, our strategic plan, as well as some other information, including what I have there is a is a video, a 5-minute video that you can spend to look a little bit about, learn a little bit more about PRCRP and our vision about advancing mission readiness. Let's go to the next slide. As I said, each and every year we have congressional language that tells us which topic areas are going to be under the umbrella of the peer review cancer research program. You'll notice that certain cancers that you might be very well aware are under the CDMRP are not under PRCRP, like breast, kidney, lung, ovarian, pancreatic, prostate, rare cancers, and melanoma. That's because they have their own standalone program. They do not, they are not eligible for funding under the peer review cancer research program. What is eligible for funding are the ones that are listed here. For instance, mesothelioma is at the bottom of that first column. It is eligible for funding, even though it's a rare cancer. Is considered one of the topic areas that are funded by the peer review cancer research program. I do want to make a plug here, though, for that rare cancer research program. You can apply to the PRCRP as well as the rare cancer research program. We have 2 different strategic plans and 2 different types of investment strategies. So you might want to look at the different investment strategies and see where you fit in best. So it is important for you to know that you do have the opportunity to look in 2 different programs. One of the things that's important for the peer review cancer research program is that all research must be relevant to service members, their families, veterans, and other military beneficiaries. And this is right in the congressional language. So let's go to the next slide. When we look at our congressional language, as I said, there is a relevance to service members and their families. So how does PRCRP answer this? We answer this by the requirement that for all applicants to respond to at least one of our military health focus areas. Those focus areas and how you respond to it will be looked at as a selection factor. So that's important to pay attention to, that it's going to be looked at as a selection factor. We have to realize that cancer risk factors, that's one of our focus areas. They're an environmental or occupational exposure may lead to the development of cancer sooner or later in your lifetime after you've actually served in the military. Mesothelioma is one of those risk factors that we see that 30 years down the line that veterans have a much higher risk factor than the general population. We also have mission readiness. Mission readiness is an important focus area as well. You only have to select one of these, but mission readiness is one of those important focus areas, in that if there's gaps in the research spectrum and in the healthcare, that would lead to gaps in mission readiness and lead to force vulnerabilities. So it's something to keep in mind. Let's go to the next slide. Now, one of the things that we've decided as a program is that we have to look at our gaps overall. Now we have 20 different topic areas. How do you look at all these different gaps? Well, we've segmented them into prevention, diagnostics and prognostics, and treatment. And these are our overarching challenges that are focused in on our research gaps. And these research gaps include, for instance, under prevention, develop innovative prevention strategies and early detection methods to decrease cancer burden. Under diagnostics, we have distinguish unique features driving cancer occurrence across the spectrum of ages. In the last couple of years, we've noted an increase, a spike almost, of that mesothelioma occurring in the younger generation. Why is that happening? So this is something that we want to pay attention to as well in diagnostics. In treatment, we have an overarching challenge of transforming cancer treatment, especially for advanced and metastatic disease, because we know a lot of these diseases are diagnosed later on in the stages. And so we definitely want to be able to transform cancer care at the very latest stage, not just at the earliest stages. So these are some of these overarching challenges under each one of these categories are important for us to pay attention to. And you'll need to select at least one But maybe your research doesn't really fit under like research gaps. Maybe it fits under more patient outcomes and patient care. Let's go to the next slide. Here we have our patient outcome gaps. These are patient well-being and survivorship, as well as disparity. Here we have overarching challenges that really zero down onto develop strategies to reduce short and long-term treatment effects, including, for instance, neurocognitive deficits. And then for disparity, advancing health equity and reduce disparities in cancer care through research. And remember, we're really looking at underserved and underrecognized populations and disparity. And those underrecognized populations actually do include the military populations as well. Because I think a lot of us think of military as very healthy. They're the prime example of human beings, right? But you know, they will be affected by cancer as well. So this is an underrecognized population. Let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about mesothelioma under a peer-reviewed cancer research program. Veterans account for over 33% of all cases in the United States. We know that exposure to asbestos is a leading cause, but we do know also now with research that was funded by the PRCRP that one of the genes that's very important here is BAP1, and that was funded by research that PRCRP, invested in because we thought it was really important. It's a very rare disease, 3,000 per year in the United States. And once again, going to plug the Rare Cancer Research Program. We want to get a receipt there, but also remember that we have an awful lot of money for you to look at for PRCRP. It's the most diagnosed type of mesothelioma is pleural mesothelioma, but that there are other types, as you know. From fiscal year 11, when mesothelioma first appeared in the topic area list, through fiscal year 21, we did 42 awards, and that's $24 million invested. But I want you to take a look at that second part. For funding for FY22, we funded 1 award under mesothelioma. Why? We only got 2 applications submitted under mesothelioma. That is not enough to make a difference. We really have to look at how are we going to increase our receipt for mesothelioma. If we're only going to do 2 applications, it's lucky that we even funded 1, right? Because we really want to fund the most impactful, scientifically meritorious. So where does your research fit along this spectrum? Because we fund the whole spectrum from basic to applied to translational to clinical trials. And I'm going to go into depth into each one of these. Let's go to the next slide. So the areas of investment that we're going to be looking at today is in that box. And that's at that box at initiative number 2. We're going to support research continuum towards fielded science. And what does fielded science mean? That means products and outcomes that will touch patients. So let's go to the next slide. There are a number of different areas that we could fund it. And I said we fund all the way from basic all the way to clinical trials. And that's what we do. You have to choose the right funding opportunity. For instance, basic and applied research, we have funding opportunities called the IDEA Award and the Career Development Award. Getting over to more translational research, we have the Impact Award, which has a more continuity of research, and we want to move forward towards impact, and that's why it's called the Impact Award. The Translational Team Science Award is really important to move the information that you're getting from clinical trials to the laboratory and then back to the clinic. That's why we call it the Translational Team Science Award. We have the Patient Wellbeing and Survivorship Award. We think that this is an incredibly important area for us right now to really fund in this area because we're not seeing a lot in our portfolio here. We used to call this the Behavioral Health Science Award. We've opened it up a little bit more, and that's why we call it the Patient Wellbeing and Survivorship Award now. And then we have our brand new opportunity here called the Advancing Cancer Care Through Clinical Trials. This is a clinical trial, just a clinical trial. We're trying to focus down on that to bring it to fielded science. So each one of these types of award mechanisms have a different focus. An idea award is not an impact award. An idea award is your most basic type of award mechanism. The impact award, you have to have preliminary data for. So keeping in mind how to separate out these different award mechanisms as I talk more in depth about each one of these. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's a snapshot of our funding opportunities. This is the slide that you can stop the recording on and take a look at each one of these, because these are really going to tell you what you need to know. So we have the Advancing Cancer Care through Clinical Trials. That's got a star on it. And so does the Idea Award and the Impact Award. Why do they have stars on them? They have stars on them because the pre-application is screened. And that means that you're going to be writing a 1 to 3 page proposal, pre-proposal. It's going to be a pre-proposal. And that pre-proposal will be screened for an invitation for you to submit the full application. We do this so that you don't have to spend a lot of time and energy on these types of award mechanisms, just in case you're not going to get funded. Therefore, it increases the opportunity for us to screen, but also decreases your risk of having to put in so much effort and not get funded. So that's why we did this for these three. The ACT, which is our clinical trial, our Idea Award, and the Impact Award. And then we have the other ones, the Career Development Award. We have 2 different options for that, the Fellow option and the Resident option. And we also have the Translational Team Science Award, which is each one of those, the last 3, the Career Development Fellow option and Resident option, and the Translational Team Science Award. You just write a letter of intent, and that letter of intent should say, I'm going to apply for the Translational Team Science Award. These are the other of my team members' names, as well as I'm going to apply under mesothelioma. And then that's all you need. You do not need an invitation for the full application. Let's go to the next slide. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here about the invitation required only opportunities. These are opportunities, as I said, you're going to have to write a pre-proposal. And here I have only what the pre-proposal is going to ask you for, essentially, as far as page length is concerned. The full application is much larger. The Idea Award is a 1-page pre-proposal is required. Preliminary data through the pre-proposal and the full proposal is highly discouraged. This is supposed to be the back of the napkin type of idea, okay? You are not supposed to be taking your R1, retooling it, and putting it in the Idea Award. This is really supposed to be about generating that preliminary data for an R1. So here we're looking at basic, high risk, high gain, innovative types of research. These are for independent PIs for 400K over 2 years. This is really about concept type of ideas and discovery. The Impact Award is still a 1-page pre-proposal, but it is a much more, the full proposal will be much larger. We do allow clinical trials here. Preliminary data is required. Why is preliminary data required for the Impact Award? Because this is really about continuity of research with an emphasis on near-term impact. Are you going to impact the research community? Are you going to impact patients? And so on. That's what we're really looking for here for the Impact Award. An assistant professor or equivalent or higher are eligible, and this is 1 million over 3 years. For the Idea and the Impact Award, those pre-proposals, only the pre-proposals, are due the 25th of May. So we have about a month, a little bit over a month here. The invitation to submit, you'll know by the end of June, and your full application then will be due the 12th of September. Now, the Advancing Cancer Care through Clinical Trials, this will be a 3-page pre-proposal. So it's going to be a little bit more of a heavy lift here. And one of the things I really want I want you to pay attention to here is for a couple of things about your pre-proposal and the full proposal. The preclinical data is required for the full proposal. You could add it to the 3-page pre-proposal to make it stronger. Okay, this clinical trial is required. No preclinical projects are allowed. You are not doing the preclinical projects to get ready for a clinical trial for this. This, you have to be ready to run, ready to get running for a clinical trial as soon as you come in the door. And when I tell you that it's important, it's because of the fact you need an IND or an IDE by the application deadline. And this is for assistant professors or above or equivalent are eligible. And this is $3 million over 4 years. So the pre-proposal is due still at the 25th of May. The invitation to submit will be the 29th of June, and the full application is due on the 27th of September. Let's go to the next slide. Now, these are the letter of intent opportunities. Here, you only have to write the letter of intent. You don't have to wait for an invitation. You can just go right ahead and start writing right now, okay, for that full application. That full application is going to be due on the 10th of August. It's important to note, though, that you have to stop everything on the 25th of July and submit your letter of intent on the 25th of July. And I'll tell you where to submit all of that in a moment. The Patient Wellbeing and Survivorship Award, as I said, it's really about the patient, quality of life, preservation of function, neurocognitive issues, and other side effects, and so on. This is an independent investigator. You can do a preliminary pilot clinical trial here, and preliminary data will be required for pilot clinical trials. This is $1 million over 3 years. The Translational Team Science Award is kind of a mix. We have the clinical trial option here. You can do a clinical trial, but you do have to have an associated ongoing or completed clinical trial, because this Translational Team Science Award is really about correlative studies. We want to take information from a clinical trial, either it's ongoing and you might go ahead and be funding it, or it's completed already and you're taking biorepository data, and you're going to be doing studies to reinform the clinic. At least 2 to 3 PIs will get together on this one, and you have to have, each one of those PIs have to have an intellectual stake. And this is $2.5 million over 4 years. Now, the Career Development Award, as you go to look for this one, you'll only find one funding opportunity. Within that funding opportunity, you'll open it up and you'll see these 2 options, either a fellow option or a resident option. The fellow option is for scientists or physician scientists within 7 years of their terminal degree. The preliminary data here is not required, but remember, if you do submit preliminary data, it will be evaluated. We're really supporting early career investigators towards further independence. Here you're looking at research assistant professors, instructors, and so on, who are looking for pushing forward and really trying to get independent. They might not have independent lab space, but they do have that moniker of a research assistant professor or instructor. This is $400K over 3 years. Now, the resident option is a little bit different here. Here, we're looking for residents to participate in research. And so they have to be residents in an accredited residential program, graduate program. We're supporting 2 different resident levels here. And the work has to be performed approximately between June of 2024 and through June of 2026, depending on the what your research level is here. For research level 1, it's $200K over 1 year. Okay, so this is really, you're trying to just really participate in research. Exempt only research is done here, so you're probably going to be doing probably a cell line work or that type of work. You're really not going to be doing stuff that you need IRB approval for or animal use approval for. Research level 2 is more like the fellow option. It's 2 years with 400K. You're really going to be delving deep into the research here and doing animal work or expedited work here. And as I said, the letter of intent is due on the 25th of July and the full application by the 10th of August. Let's go to the next slide. Now, where do we find these funding opportunities? You can find them on grants.gov. The assistance listing, or CFDA, is 12.420. When you put that in, you might not find PRCRP right away. Look for April 4th, because that's when we released all of our funding opportunities. You can find it for April 4th. You can also find it on our website, very easily to find it on our website, or you could find it on our portal, which is the Electronic Biomedical Research Application Portal, or EBRAP for short. You're going to have to get to know EBRAP anyhow, because you're going to have to get your own profile and login information. So you might as well start looking at it right now and get everything situated so you're ready to go when that July 25th comes about, or May 25th comes about, to really put in your pre-application or your letter of intent. Let's go to the next slide. So once you get that funding opportunity, how are you going to apply? Remember, you're going to apply the pre-application on EBRAP, the full application on grants.gov. The funding opportunity announcement will give you all of the information, your program goals. As I said, go and take a look at the PRCRP webpage. That will give you some more in-depth information. The focus areas are our overarching challenges, and the topic areas are important. Each and every funding opportunity has its own award intent. IDEA award is really not looking for preliminary data, where impact award is, for instance. Your review criteria, I'm going to get into that in a moment, and the deadlines. Are you going to remember those deadlines that I just said? Don't worry about it. It's right on the front cover of your funding opportunity. This is where I'm going to ask you to sacrifice a tree or two. Go ahead and print out that funding opportunity, tear it apart, highlight it, really use those tabs, really spend some time on it with your team so that you really understand it. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is our program cycle. Our funding opportunities were released on April 4th. The pre-application receipt I've talked about, either a letter of intent or full application, or letter of intent, excuse me, or pre-application. Now, their pre-application screening and invitation to submit, that screening is going to be done by our programmatic panel. And I'll introduce you to our programmatic panel in a little bit. They had a full application receipt. I told you the deadline dates, but what happens to your full application receipt after it's pulled down from grants.gov? We do peer and programmatic review. That's our two-tiered review system that I'm going to get into. Let's go to the next slide. When we look at our two-tiered review system, we see that we have peer review and programmatic review. Peer review is really criterion-based. It's against an absolute gold standard. So the peer review, the peer reviewers are instructed not to compare each application to one another. We don't have standing panels. We don't have study section. So it's really important for you to say this should be reviewed on a mesothelioma panel, because the mesothelioma awards are reviewed on mesothelioma only panels. So that was really important for you to pay attention to. So it's really, their criteria is going to be something that you're really going to spend some time looking at, so that you can use it as your guide to what you are going to be actually putting in your application. And the outcome there is summary statements. And the summary statement gives you the numeric scores as well as strengths and weaknesses. And here at programmatic review, our programmatic panel will start comparing and contrasting these different ones. Now, I want you to pay special attention to this, because of the fact that here they're going to determine it by program relevance and potential impact and so on. But say you have a mesothelioma application that scored a little bit lower than a brain cancer application, okay? The brain cancer application kind of phoned in their military health focus area statement. They phoned it in. While the mesothelioma application spent some time and really gave a thoughtful military health focus area statement. This could actually pop you up to get funded. So there is no pay line. There is no absolute overall score that you need to get in order to get funded. It really is a balancing of that portfolio and who really answered the intent of the program and the adherence to the intent of the award mechanism and the potential for impact. Let's go to the next slide. I told you that the peer review criteria was important. And I say that because of the fact that we have an application package, right? You have your application package, and your application package has the project narrative, it has the career development plan, environment and career guide information in it, section, and it might have an impact statement and so on. So when you look at the peer review criteria, which is written at the back of the program announcement, you pull that out, and then very, very carefully make sure that every single part of your application answers what needs to be answered. Here we have the principal investigator. That will be answered within the bio sketch, as well as your project narrative. The career development plan, we have it at a application attachment for that. So it's going to have its very own peer review criteria for it. And when you look at the peer review criteria for that, make sure that you've answered each and every one of those peer review criteria in that attachment. Because things that you don't answer give the reviewers an opening to give you a weakness. And we want to decrease those weaknesses and increase those strengths. Let's go to the next slide. Some important things I already talked about for peer review criteria is that military health focus area and our overarching challenges. Don't just brush off that overarching challenge. Spend a little time on it, because it's going to be important in your impact statement. And for the programmatic panel, membership lists are important, and they're available on that PRCRP webpage. So you don't want to have anybody on the programmatic panel on your application. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Let's go to the next slide. Strategies to answer some challenges along the way. Plan ahead. Your deadlines are important. And when you're putting together your team, remember the team skills and remember to bring those forward and actually say what those skills are. Dissect that funding opportunity and really understand it. If you have questions, you can always ask questions at help@ebrap.org. So it's important to get your profile set up on ebrap.org. Your grantsmanship is really important here. And the reason I say that is that if you have a 10-word sentence and six of those words are actually abbreviations, you're going to tire out your reviewers, and tired reviewers are annoyed. And you don't want to annoy anyone that's going to review you, right? So review your documents prior to submission. You do have a verification period. We don't have a grace period, but we do have a verification period that will help you with some of your application parts, but not all of them. Use the peer review criteria as your checklist. And as I said, tell how your research aligns with the intent. It's important. And I'm going to leave you with this. Cool science is good. Impactful science is great. So that is where you want to really spend a little bit of time and show how impactful it is and important to patients with mesothelioma. Let's go to our next slide. Some pitfalls that I really want you to avoid is this is the programmatic panel listing here. Make sure that none of them are on your application. Okay, don't exceed the page limits. I think that's pretty standardized that you shouldn't do that. It takes grants.gov 72 hours to validate. So that 72 hours, you might not be able to see your application in eBrap because we do have that verification period that's after the deadline. Okay, it's after the deadline. So you can go and look at your application once we're able to pull it down from grants.gov after that validation. So it might be 72 hours. You only have a couple more days to look at your application in eBrap and use that verification period to make sure that you have the right statement of work, that you have the right bio sketch and so on. Don't ignore it. There are two parts of your application that you can do nothing with during the verification period. And that's the project narrative and the budget. You're not allowed to correct these during the verification period if it's before the deadline. If it's after, excuse me, if it's after the deadline. If it's after the deadline, you can do nothing for the project narrative and the budget. If it's before the deadline, you can always re-upload it through grants.gov and put it in to your file there. So let's go to the next slide. So once again, these are our funding opportunities, just a nice little snapshot. Remember, the ones with the stars do need to be sent in right away from May 25th, pre-application deadline, and our letter of intents are the other ones. So let's go to the next slide. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimbark. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions from our community that I've assembled, and I will just run through them really quickly with you. I guess the first question that came up is, in the review process, one of the questions is our community wanted to know, how is their voice included in these review panels? Like patients, families, caregivers, and the bereaved, how are they reflected in that?
One of the things I want to point out is that for each and every our review panels, for the peer review and the programmatic review, we do include consumers on each one of our panels, and the consumers are our patients. We have patient advocates that come to our panels, and they have an equal voice to the scientists on both peer review and programmatic review. You might take a look at our programmatic review list and say, oh, I don't see anybody for mesothelioma on there. No worries, we do bring ad hocs in at the pre-application phase as well as the full application phase to make sure that voices are heard. Both scientific mesothelioma people as well as people who have been touched by this disease.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So one of the questions we often hear from the research community is, do you really mean that you'll fund researchers and research institutions that are outside the US? And of course, we reassure them that that's the case. But how does that work? How can research being done in another country benefit the US military warfighters and military veterans families, and then the US population?
So let's take that very easily. I mean, one of the things that we have to realize is that research, a person from the United States is a human being, right? And all human beings across the world, right? So we're going to get information regardless of where it is being researched. That's going to come back to the United States and actually help our citizens in the United States as well as our military. So that is allowed. We do fund across the entire world, and we don't have any restrictions on it. Okay. So when we really do mean it, then we do fund across the world. Actually, we do fund quite a bit from Australia because and the mesothelioma field, because Australia is one of the areas where there's a lot of mesothelioma.
Wonderful. I appreciate that clarification. One of the questions that I get, and I have to answer this a lot when I'm speaking to elected officials and to policymakers, is why is this particular funding it is not included technically in the Department of Defense budget, but it's a congressional allocation. Folks wonder how and why that is.
Okay, so I mean, it's a long history. Like CDMRP has a long history, and it really goes back to those breast cancer advocates who went to the Hill and asked for a different way to fund breast cancer and have their voice in that fund. So I think that's one of the things that really started it up. Okay, and so breast cancer started in 92-93 period, and then we saw prostate cancer and ovarian cancer come in around the 97 period, and then slowly but surely we saw the growth of CDMRP to a $1.5 billion research organization with over 30 different programs. PRCRP started in 2009, and there was always a question, was it going to stick around because it's this multi-topic area? But I think it's really helpful for some of the topic areas that might not get their own program. And so it really does answer the call It really does answer the call from these advocates asking for a different way. I'm not saying that the way that NIH does things is bad. I'm saying that diversifying your funds is always the way to go. You know, we do that for retirement. We do that for science as well. Diversify your funds, approach it a little bit differently, and you can get some answers that you might not have gotten doing it in a more traditional way. So that's really what we're trying to do here, and that's how we answer the call for patient advocates as well as the military, especially with mesothelioma.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. It actually leads to my next question because, like you said, there's a diversity in funding. One of the questions that has been raised, and I know the answer, but I wanted to make sure we talked about it today, is one of the questions we often get is, how is this not double dipping? If a researcher or a research institution comes and applies for DoD for CDMRP funding in whichever program, and then how do we make sure that that's not double dipping, say, to an NIH grant? And I always point to the GAO audit that says in every situation where there's two different, there's funds, those are audited, verified, checked, and there is no evidence of double dipping per the GAO.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that it's a good question. It's a really good question. One of the things that we do make sure is that you are not submitting the same application to NIH and to us. If you do submit the same application, for instance, people do this all the time. They'll submit a very similar application to both, okay? And say we selected for funding and NIH selects it for funding. Well, if that happens, then the institution and the PI have a question to answer. Which one are you going to take? Okay, you can't have both, okay, right, because it is double dipping and it's not allowed. If there is differences in your in the awards and you can justify that, yes, you can have both awards because you're doing something that's scientifically different. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. So yes, and one of the other things that we do is we have insight into what NIH is actually funding, and they have insight into what we're actually funding. Kind of a behind the scenes type of open door that we can look at each other, what we're seeing, to make sure that that double dipping is not happening. And so that is kind of like a doorstop to make sure that that doesn't happen.
That's fantastic. And I think the message here is that the NIH and CDMRP and other research programs at the federal level are going to speak to one another through some sort of mechanism. So it's important to have that level of authenticity and transparency about what you do. So I really appreciate that. The one last question that we get regularly from the research community is, many times researchers or clinician researchers are the only person in their institution working on mesothelioma, but they work collaboratively with, say, another person at another institution. So let's say, University A and University B. Can applications be submitted jointly by University A and B for funding through the PRCRP?
Sure. I mean, we have a partnering award mechanism, the Translational Team Science Award, that you can do that. Okay. And if you don't do that one because maybe you are doing more basic study, you can always do it through an IDEA award, and one of them can be as a sub-awardee. Okay. So that's fine. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. That often comes up, and it's come up in the foundation's own grant making process. And we wanted to make sure that was clear to the research community, that you can work together and work collaboratively across institutions in these very specific spaces. So thank you so much.
Yes.
Dr. Kimbark, I want to say again on behalf of the Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation how much we've appreciated working with you in your partnership, and how much we appreciate this investment into research into this deadly cancer. We know that we can't do it alone, and we absolutely are grateful for your enthusiasm and intellectual rigor in helping us elevate the level of applications that'll be coming in and hopefully be funded this year.
And thank you.
Thank you so much.
One more plug-in, please, mesothelioma community. We want to see more applications. We want to see that receipt skyrocket. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to the community.
Thank you, everyone.